Hello and welcome back to my world of stuff. It's time for the very first episode of a brand new series within the world of stuff. This is something I've been teasing for the past few weeks that I'm going to do. It's called First Impressions, and I'm going to spend a little time looking at the first episode of some very popular genre series, and in fact possibly some not very popular series as well. And I'm going to look at these episodes and see how well they establish the premise of this new series, and how, perhaps briefly, how the series that followed built upon the work done in that first episode. Don't worry, those of you who like the full retrospectives of shows, I'm still going to be doing them, but I just thought it'd be quite nice to focus on the first episode, because that's where shows often live or die. If they establish themselves in the first episode, they get an audience. Sometimes audiences fall away if that first episode doesn't do its job. I think the first episode of any TV series is the most important, because that's where you're announcing yourself to your audience. This is where you're saying, this is what we are. Come aboard. And if you don't get it right, if the pieces aren't in place in that first episode and it doesn't connect with an audience, there's no second chances. You don't get a second chance to make a first impression. So I think it's important to look at first episodes of shows and see what some of them did right and perhaps what some of them did wrong. For this first episode, we're going to leap back to 1968 for Gerry and Sylvia Anderson's follow-up to Thunderbirds, Captain Scarlet and the Mysterons, which debuted with its first episode, The Mysterons, in 1968. And then, perversely, I'm going to break the format of this series by leaping forward to 2005 and looking at the first two episodes of New Captain Scarlet. This was the CGI version of the series, the reimagining that Gerry worked very hard at creating, was frustrated by when it was so badly handled by ITV. I think it's interesting that in 2005 two British icons of the 1960s were relaunched. Doctor Who reappeared in March 2005, and so did Captain Scarlet and the Mysterons as New Captain Scarlet. Guess which one of the two was treated with reverence and respect? And guess which one was butchered and thrown away? It wasn't Doctor Who. So New Captain Scarlet came along in 2005, but first of all, let's talk about the very first episode of Captain Scarlet and the Mysterons from 1968. This is an interesting show because, of course, it was the follow-up to Thunderbirds. And now looking back, it's hard to imagine that Thunderbirds didn't run for years. Probably a lot of people think it did. But there were just two series, 26 episodes in the first series and just 6 in the second. Because Sir Lew Grade at ITC, who financed all these shows and a raft of filmed adventure shows in the 60s, he was desperate to get these shows on the American networks. And if he couldn't do that, he considered them failures. And he wasn't able to do it with Thunderbirds. So the plug was pulled 6 episodes into the second series, and he instructed Gerry and Sylvia to come up with something else. What they came up with was Captain Scarlet and the Mysterons. It couldn't have been more different. Whereas Thunderbirds was warm and exciting and inclusive, and of course ran for an hour and really developed the characters and situations, and that was at the behest of Lew Grade, who'd seen test footage of the first few episodes that had been made of Thunderbirds and said, this has got to be an hour. This is spectacle. You need to make these episodes an hour. So Gerry and his team had to work to beef up those early episodes and then reconfigure the later episodes that were in production to make them hour-longs. Captain Scarlet and the Mysterons, however, is a more typical traditional 25-minute episode series. I think it sets out its stall extremely well in that first episode, The Mysterons. If we look at the title sequence first of all, and this tells you that this is going to be very different and very dark. We open up on cold, wet, deserted alleyway and footsteps of somebody walking down that alleyway. We hear the brilliant Ed Bishop, who would go on to play Commander Ed Straker in the classic UFO, giving us sort of a narration about the situation that we're in and who we're about to meet. And there's a screech of sort of lights and cameras, the sound of a cat squealing, a bin being knocked over, and then we see in the spotlight Captain Scarlet, who pulls out a gun and fires it, and the person who we've been in the footsteps of collapses. This sort of sets up what this series is. This is about killing people quite brutally. Then we move across to Mars 2068, the Martian exploration vehicle, which is, if you watch my Thunderbirds video, the little nose cone part of Zero X from the Thunderbirds Are Go film, crawling across the Martian landscape. It is actually referred to later on as a Zero X mission by Colonel White, so that does establish that this is part of the Thunderbirds universe. Thunderbirds was set in 100 years hence, when it was made in 65, 66. And I think if these shows were being made today, they would be crossovers galore. You'd have Stingray turning up to help International Rescue. You'd have International Rescue helping Spectrum. You'd have that sort of interconnectedness that MCU like universe. That wasn't a thing back in the 60s, but it is interesting that they did think about putting in a line to say that it was a Zero-X craft. Anyway, this craft and its team of astronauts come upon this huge crater full of these weird-looking buildings and constructions, all slightly hazy because the camera, I think, has been smeared with Vaseline or something to give that indistinct blur. Inside the complex, the Mysterons acknowledge the fact that humans have made contact with them and they must reach out and communicate with the humans. Unfortunately, the humans mistake this attempt at first contact as first attack, and they open fire first and destroy the complex. But they don't realise that the Mysterons can recreate things, bring things back from the dead. So they create their complex, attack the exploration mission and leave the astronauts for dead, and declare war on Earth. That sets up the scenario for the series, this war of attrition, with the Mysterons vowing vengeance on the human race that's come to the planet and committed this atrocity against them. And I suppose this is interesting in that it sums up the classic science fiction attitude of man's aggression and man taking his aggression out amongst the stars. I mean, this is a theme of the classic The Day the Earth Stood Still, which is a story about an alien who comes to Earth to warn humanity about its aggressive tendencies and warn it that it mustn't take those tendencies out into space because it will get short shrift if it does so. And that's very much what we've got here. The Mysterons are a bit pissed off that humanity has attacked them for no apparent reason. So now they want to destroy humanity. You might think that's an overreaction, but I think it's entirely understandable. We're then back on Earth. We meet Spectrum, the organisation that exists on its huge floating headquarters called Cloud Base, this massive aircraft carrier. And we meet the various characters of Spectrum. And it's a brilliant conceit, and you can understand why kids like me fell in love with it. Because you've got all these characters with their different coloured tunics. You've got Captain Scarlet, the hero. You've got Captain Blue, voiced by Ed Bishop. You've got Lieutenant Green, he's one of the communications officers. Colonel White in his white tunic. Dr. Fawn, Captain Ochre. I think they probably ran out of colours as the series was going on. But it was a fascinating conceit of these characters all identifiable by these different colour-coded costumes. Absolutely brilliant. In typical Jerry Anderson fashion, you have this fleet of interceptor pilot fighters, and they're all women. They've all got names like Harmony and Rhapsody and Melody. And that's quite progressive to have women as aircraft pilots. I think that's obviously a Sylvia Anderson influence on the show, and it works brilliantly. And the model work is, of course, superb. Cloud Base is a great model. The fighters are fantastic. They're straightforward sort of fighter jets. You've got the ground vehicles, the Spectrum Pursuit vehicles, the iconic classic Anderson vehicles. The first episode itself is a fairly standard sort of runaround in that the Mysterons have threatened to destroy the president of the world president, and Spectrum take it upon themselves to protect him. They take him to a safe house, which I think is supposed to be in New York, and of course, because it's a Jerry Anderson show, the streets are deserted and you very rarely see any other characters apart from the main characters. But there's quite a brutal sequence where I think it's Captain Brown, I think is the officer who's looking after the president, and because he's been infiltrated by the Mysterons, there's a scene where you see sort of smoke pouring out of his collar and he blows up and destroys the building that the president is in. Luckily, the president has been rescued moments before. On a Spectrum mission, Captain Scarlet and Captain Black, their vehicle careers off the road. Captain Black appears to be killed. Captain Scarlet is injured but recovers. And then he is entrusted with looking after the president to take him to a second safe place. However, he is Mysteronized. The Mysterons have taken control of him. They brought him back from the dead during the accident. He is now under their control. Captain Scarlet then plans to kill the president, so he takes him to a massive car park in the centre of London, which is frankly the most impractical car park it is possible to imagine. It's got one of those sort of spiralling pathways up to the car park, and I detest them in multi-storey car parks. But this goes on and on and on, and the car park itself is just two big parking spaces. It's not the most practical use of space. And of course there's no other cars around. Captain Scarlet goes up there, he's about to kill the president. Captain Blue is in pursuit. And because the puppets can't move, Captain Blue uses a jetpack to fly up there and shoot at him. Captain Scarlet falls off the gantry and dies, but comes back to life. Now he's free of Mysteron control, but he's indestructible, as Colonel White says at the end of the episode, which is quite an amusing line of dialogue. This offers the exciting proposition that Captain Scarlet will be a prime weapon in our fight against the Mysterons. What he's really saying is, this is going to be an exciting TV series. It's a very good first episode. I really enjoyed watching it again. And I think that's a nostalgia thing. Again, so much of this channel is about nostalgia. It just reminded me of watching this in 1968. And I don't know if I was conscious of the fact that it wasn't quite what Thunderbirds was, and it was something very different. But I think as a child, you just respond to the visual stimulus. And I responded to the puppets in their coloured costumes. I responded to the vehicles, the different types of Spectrum vehicles, the little red pursuit car. And I can't for the life of me remember the names of them all now. A fascinating idea of a vehicle that you drive from behind. You drive looking back at a screen. So you're sitting in reverse and a screen shows you what's in front. Crazy idea, but it's very inventive. Chaos in reality, I suspect. But it was a really inventive, clever idea. But I think I came away from it, again, thinking, wow, that was really very dark. I mean, it's not the sort of thing you'd pitch for kids these days. If you think the follow-up series to this was Joe 90, and that was about a 9-year-old boy whose brain is overwritten with the brains of other people, including assassins, pilots, astronauts, who could do espionage missions. It's boggling that they were allowed to get away with it. And again, I think in Captain Scarlet, it is very, very violent and very dark. And there's a lot of death in it. I mean, Captain Black is dead, but he's been resurrected as a Mysteron agent. Captain Scarlet falls from thousands of feet from this gantry and, of course, would have splattered on the ground below. But his body's recovered and he now has regenerative powers, although he's free of Mysteron control. And that's what powers the series going forward. And I know from a repeat viewing years ago when I watched some of the episodes again, it does get a bit wearing because it is very dark and it's very humorless and the dialogue is very flat. Whilst the puppets themselves are better proportioned than previous Anderson puppets, which tended to have slightly oversized heads or odd bodies, here they are more anatomically accurate in terms of the body shape. But I think there's a lack of humanity, which I suppose reflects the fact that they're fighting against an inhuman force. But there's no humour, there's no light and shade, there's no real sense of character. It's a great voice talent. You've got the great Francis Matthews, who's very well known as Paul Temple on TV. He delivers this Cary Grant type drawl as Captain Scarlet, or Paul Metcalf. Cy Grant, who I mentioned in my review of At the Earth's Core. It was very progressive to have this character, Lieutenant Green, in the control centre at Spectrum. Great Donald Gray, who played Colonel White, and Captain Black, and in fact provided the voice of the Mysterons. It was a really good cast of formidable Anderson talent. But it's a bleak show. And again, it just makes me marvel that they got away with this back in the 1960s. But watching this first episode, I thought, yes, it is a very good introduction to this world. And it really sets it up. And it's a simple story of humanity is pissed off an alien race that wants to get its revenge and is going to do its level best to cause trouble all over the earth, ultimately with the destruction of humanity. So I think as a first episode, it's pretty damned impressive. It nips along, and obviously we're conscious of the limitations of the puppets that really can't walk. There's always a problem for the Anderson productions that these puppets shown walking just did not look right. But it's spectacle, the models are fantastic. I don't think some of the ground model work is maybe quite as impressive as Thunderbirds. Thunderbirds, of course, most of its model work was aircraft flying and things, giant machines. I think here with cars and things, it looks more model-y perhaps than the Thunderbird stuff. But that's very minor criticism. Very enjoyable indeed. Then I led forward to 2005 and Gerry Anderson's final production, his long-anticipated reimagining of Captain Scarlet. He always wanted to do a new version of Thunderbirds, but the rights issues with Thunderbirds remain incredibly complex. But he did have a go at Captain Scarlet and reimagined it as a computer-animated series. And I watched the first 2 episodes of this series because the debut story is Instrument of Destruction. It's written by Phil Ford. Went on to do work on Doctor Who and the Sarah Jane Adventures. He's still involved now. I think he still writes Doctor Who books. And he's written lots of Anderson-related material. And of course he wrote one of the classic David Tennant stories, The Waters of Mars, which was his penultimate special episode before he bowed out. This 2-part story is directed by David Lane, ironically, who'd worked on so many of the puppet shows. And again, you may remember, I love the way my videos all interconnect. He was the director of the Thunderbirds of Go film, and he directed some episodes of Catweasel. So it's fascinating to watch these people threading their way through various shows and films that I'm talking about on this channel. And for certainly the first episode, it sticks more or less to the story as established in the Mysterons back in 1968, when Spectrum, which is now operating from Skybase, they've picked up an identified mysterious extraplanetary signal from the surface of Mars. So they send Captain Scarlet and Captain Black on a search of the desert surface to find out who is sending it. They discover the alien city. Captain Black reacts too quickly and destroys the city, fearing that they will be under attack. The city, of course, rebuilds itself, and the Mysteron inhabitants, again speaking that deep resonant voice, they will destroy humanity and turn its violence back on it. Captain Black is apparently killed in their retaliation. Captain Scarlet is mortally injured, but as we discover, he's under Mysteron control. Scarlet sets about trying to destroy Skybase. That's his first mission, to destroy Spectrum, before it can step up to defend the Earth from the Mysteron attack. In the second part of the story, Captain Black has been resurrected, and there's some quite creepy graveyard sequences of Captain Black, who's been killed in the mission to Mars. He's been buried, and he's brought back to life by the Mysteron, and he smashes out of his coffin. It's something worthy of Stephen King, I think, where this creature comes back to life. He gets control of a worldwide distribution company, persuades Russia to launch an all-out attack on Skybase and transport enough nuclear material to crack the world wide open. So they go straight to the core, as it were, of destroying the Earth completely. Captain Scarlet's back to his old self. He's had a bit of bother when he's felt to be a Mysteron spy when he tries to destroy Skybase, but he's now free of Mysteron control, and he teams up with Captain Blue to stop Captain Black destroying the world. I watched these two episodes straight after the first episode of Captain Scarlet, and my God, they exhausted me. They are literally non-stop. I mean, they don't pause for a second. You're on Mars, then you've got explosions, then you've got Captain Scarlet trying to destroy Skybase, you've got Captain Black trying to destroy the world. It's set piece after set piece after set piece, and yet what it does, it also puts humanity on these characters. It gives them a bit more believability because they have relationships. Captain Scarlet and Captain Blue are friends. They call each other by their names. There are relationships amongst the angels. There's humanity here, which wasn't in the original series, because that wasn't what they did back in the 60s. These were adventure stories in the 60s. They were about characters having adventures, and at the end of it, they just reset, ready for the next adventure. But here, there is a sense of humanity here. There's a sequence at Captain Black's funeral where Destiny Angel is upset that he's died, and they're trying to comfort her, and you think, well, this is humanity which we didn't get in the original. It raced along, it rattled along. And what I will say is that for a show that was made, it was aired in 2005, so they must have been filming it for 2 years previously, because I think there were 2 series of 13 episodes. It's hella good. The animation still stands up extremely well. Computer animation has moved on a lot since then, but this is very good. And it's dynamic. I mean, of course, they can do all the things that they couldn't do in the puppet series. They can run, they can fight. There's some quite convincing fight sequences here, physical punch-ups. They can jump, they can leap. All human interaction is possible with these animated figures. And the animation is very, very good. It's very convincing. There is some uncanny valley in the faces, I think. They don't completely convince. There are some skin tones which are a bit off. Colonel White, his complexion is slate grey, as if he's died and has been resurrected as a zombie. So there are some issues with that sort of uncanny valley thing, which has always been a problem with animated figures. But I think, bearing in mind this is 20 years ago, it's very well directed by David Lane. He gives it a real cinematic feel, particularly in the action sequences when the agents here, they don't have the same equipment as the 60s version. You get a version of the red pursuit vehicle, but the other kit isn't quite there, certainly not in the first episode that I see. But Captain Blue at one point is on this sort of bike thing which he's leaning forward on, and it's filmed in such a way the camera's swerving and leaping, and it looks filmic, it looks cinematic, and it's filmed in a way to detract, I think, from the fact that it's computer animated stuff. And I think on that basis, that it's computer animation from 20 years ago, it's not embarrassing. You don't look at it and think, ooh, that's a bit creaky. Apart from, as I said, some of the facial stuff. You get expression, you get lots of this stuff on there. Shock, surprise, horror, it's all there. But there is that uncanniness about it. But I think for 20-odd-year-old animation, it's extremely good. And as I say, these episodes hurtled along. Spectacle after spectacle. It was hugely entertaining. It did have a bit more humanity to it than the original. Not a lot more humour, certainly from these 2 episodes, because it's a dire situation. The world is at war with an unseen hostile alien threat. Not much time for laughter, but it felt more human. And I really enjoyed it. Now, of course, the history of the series is, and I think it devastated Jerry, because, as I said, this was launched more or less the same time as Doctor Who, whereas Doctor Who's all bells and whistles and a huge hit. Captain Scarlet was there was no interest from any of the networks to buy this series. No one was interested. So it was hived off to an ITV hyperactive Saturday morning entertainment show called Ministry of Mayhem. These shows had existed since the 70s with things like Swap Shop and Tiz Was, and they all, as part of their lineup, would have cartoons and animated things dropped in. But they had this series and they treated it appallingly. Credits were hacked off, it was cut to pieces, the people who hosted the show had no connection to it, so they were all Captain Scarlet's coming up, but there was no continuity to it. It was effectively thrown away and wasted, and I think it broke Jerry Anderson's heart, and he never worked on anything again after that. Of course, he became ill a few years later. Not an auspicious end to an incredible career, but it is an auspicious end because it's a very good production. I think it's something that I think Jerry should have been proud of, and of course his pride was undermined by the fact that ITV treated it appallingly and didn't treat Jerry Anderson with his reputation or his product with any respect at all, which is absolutely shocking. And I honestly think that one thing that you've got to take into consideration when you're weighing up the pros and cons between the original Captain Scarlet and the Mysterons and new Captain Scarlet is the music. Because, of course, the original Captain Scarlet series had a classic Barry Gray signature tune, that thumping music at the end of the episodes. The beginning, of course, we had that creepy alleyway sequence that I mentioned earlier. But at the end, we had this extraordinary, such a memorable and iconic theme tune with that vocoderized voice saying Captain Scarlet. And of course, those fantastic end card illustrations with the credits with the artwork of Ron Embleton. Absolutely iconic. So that's a massive point in Captain Scarlet and the Mysterons' favour. But to the credit of new Captain Scarlet, Crispin Merrill provided an extremely good, adrenalised, high-impact sort of score. Very memorable, very tuneful, rattles along, with images, CGI images, which were taken from the episode, so it didn't quite have the same impact. But I think that Crispin Merrill's music is extremely credible. I think that Crispin Merrill did not let the side down when it came to new Captain Scarlet. It certainly captures the energy and vibrancy of the series. Of course, it's not Barry Gray, but then very little is. Having watched Captain Scarlet and Mysterons episode 1, and having watched Instrument of Destruction parts 1 and 2, which is best? It is a very close call. But for purely nostalgic reasons, I'm going with Captain Scarlet and the Mysterons from 1968 because I was there at the time. I remember embracing this at the time. Now, as I said, I can see how humorless it is and how bleak and how nihilistic it is. Not the sort of thing you do for kids these days. But it's the nostalgia that pulls me into it. And I watched it again and thought, for all its faults and its humorlessness, this sort of stuff was being made back then without the aid of any computer technology, all the stuff we have these days, the CGI and all that sort of stuff. This was made practically with models and people on wires. And I admire that was done. And I really like new Captain Scarlet. But I don't have the emotional connection to it. And I am conscious it is a reboot of an old idea, but it's an extremely well done, well considered and well thought out reboot. Sympathetic to the original, updating motifs and tropes from the original and doing it in a style that remains modern 20 years later. It is a close call. I enjoyed both of them. It was a very entertaining hour and a half. But I'm going to give Captain Scarlet and the Mysterons, first episode, 8 out of 10. Whereas Instrument of Destruction parts 1 and 2 from new Captain Scarlet, decent 7 out of 10. It is a close run thing, both extremely entertaining. I suspect if I was to continue watching both shows, I would find the original Captain Scarlet wearing, because as I said, I remember watching some episodes years ago when it had a repeat screening and thinking, oh, this is very samey, I suppose. The tone is much the same. But I'm interested in new Captain Scarlet, in seeing how the humanity of the characters is developed across the run. So, having said that I preferred Captain Scarlet and the Mysterons, I am intrigued at the possibility of watching more of new Captain Scarlet. And if I do, I'll tell you all about it here. So that's the first episode of First Impressions. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you get the gist of what I'm trying to do here. If you are new, why not like and subscribe? You might as well. No harm in it. It doesn't cost you anything. It's the word subscribe, but that doesn't mean you pay anything. You just click the subscribe button and you get to see the videos as they come up. If you want to watch them, you might not want to watch them all, but at least you'll know that they're out there and you'll see the things that you want to see when they come up. If you want one of these fabulous t-shirts, by the way, there's a link down below to get a Keep Taking the Stuff t-shirt. Let me know what you think of this first episode of First Impressions. As I said, the idea is to do one episode, and I've done 3 because I'm like that. If you've got any ideas of first episodes of things you'd like me to watch, please leave a comment down below. No matter how obscure it is, I can probably find it. So let me know what you think, and I will look at whatever first episode you come up with on what I hope will be a running series, maybe one every week to 10 days or something, depending on time. So let me know what you thought of this episode. Let me know any ideas you have for future episodes. I will see you soon. But until I do, keep taking the stuff.